Yeah, thanks a lot for the kind introduction. I am a cognitive linguist at the Department of English and American Studies at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. And yeah, my main research area so far has been metaphors in poetry. Today I'm diving into a slightly different area, which is studying the role of conceptual metaphors in teaching English idioms to learners of English. All right, I'm going to start with a very brief introduction and a definition of what idioms are and what methods have been used to teach idioms. Then I'm going to talk about the role of conceptual metaphors in understanding idiomatic expressions. Then I'll talk about the pilot study which I've conducted, and the results will be discussed for advantages of using conceptual metaphors in teaching idioms to learners of English. And I'll conclude my presentation by talking about some future investigations about some empirical studies that I'd like to do. And the outcome will hopefully be a handbook for learners of English. All right, so idiomatic expressions have often been defined as multi-word items whose figurative interpretation cannot be derived from the compositional analyses of the individual words. So this means that, for instance, like to kick the bucket, if we just look at the individual words, we can hardly guess its meaning, that it's to die, because the meaning of the individual literal words do not really reflect the meaning of the idiomatic expression. So there are different models for how idiomatic expressions can be classified or categorized. One famous is Nunberg's 1978 idiomatic classification model, which divides idioms into non-decomposable idioms. So here we have idiomatic expressions that refer to phrases such as kick the bucket, throw the lions, or pull a leg, in which stipulated idiomatic meanings can hardly be derived in a compositional manner from the constituent parts. So this was an example that I just have shown with kick the bucket or pull a leg, or throw the lions, where we do not really know what the meaning actually is if we just look at the individual words. Then we have abnormally decomposable idioms. These are phrases such as spill the beans, in which the decomposable components relate to the referent via conceptual metaphors. So this is actually what I'm going to focus on today. What we have here are, for instance, spill the beans, which reflects the knowledge of divulging information. And here we see our body as a container, and that spills kind of beans that spills information. And the third one is decomposable idioms. That are kind of the easier ones to understand. Even if you do not know the meaning, you'll probably be able to guess it, because these are phrases such as pop the question or play with fire, in which some constituents are used metaphorically. So even if you do not know that play with fire means actually to act in a dangerous way, we can guess that it has something to do with something dangerous, because playing with fire is dangerous. So how could idioms be taught to foreign language learners? So one method is rote learning and memorization, but this method has been criticized severely because, of course, if students just learn things by heart, it will be hard for them to actually use those in like real world contexts. Another method is comparison of idiomatic expressions between first and second language learners. This method has advantages and disadvantages. So research has shown that sometimes if you have an idiom in your native language, and if you have a similar one in the language that you learn, you might find it easier to remember it or to understand it. But if the idiom looks very similar in two different languages, but actually means something different, this may lead to confusion. So another method, which is quite successful, is to put an idiomatic expression into meaningful learning context. So I think you all know what I mean by that. So this is just if you have an idiom kind of embedded in a text, for instance, which makes it easier for students, to understand how it's used, why it's used, when it's used. Two factors that also influence idiomatic expression learning and teaching is the frequency. So the more frequently an idiom is used, it's usually easier for students to learn it and to remember it. And also transparent idioms are easier than opaque ones. And my focus today will be on raising learners' awareness of conceptual metaphors underlying the idiom. And this has also been shown to help students to understand that idiomatic expression. So here's an example. So what is conceptual metaphor theory? Or what are conceptual metaphors? This goes back to Lakoff and John's 1980 very famous book, Metaphors We Live By. And the scholars say that much of what we do, so how we think, act, communicate, is underlined by or structured by underlying conceptual metaphors. So what we have here, an example is a common expression or saying is he's wasting my time. And in this case, we like might not even recognize its metaphoricity because it's so common. But if you think more concretely about it, you'll see that you cannot actually like literally waste time. And what happens here is that the abstract domain time is compared, conceptualized as money. So what we do here, think of time by thinking of money. Another example is I gave you that idea. What happens here is we have ideas, objects, or they seem to be without direction in life. Here we conceptualize life in terms of journeys. So this is a conceptual metaphor where we have the abstract domain coming first and the more concrete domain coming later, and that mapping happens from the concrete domain onto the more abstract domain. And if we now look at idiomatic expressions, we will see that some idiomatic or many idiomatic expressions have underlying conceptual metaphor. So an example is to blow on stack, which means to become very angry. And if we analyze what this means, we see that it has an underlying conceptual metaphor, which is anger is a hot fluid in a container. So, if you become angry, you will know that your body gets hot, it's kind of boiling. And this reflects, to some extent, the meaning of the idiom. So some more examples would be here. To spill the beans means reveal a secret. And what happens here is we see the body as a container. To hold one's tongue, not to speak. The conceptual metaphor is control is holding something in one's hand. To carry a torch has an underlying metaphor, affection is heat. Let a cat out of the bag refers to knowing is seeing. And they were breathing fire, which means to be very angry, and has a conceptual metaphor, anger is heat. So research has shown that metaphoric thought plays an important role in how people process and interpret idiomatic expressions. Rather than being isolated lexical items in a mental lexicon, idioms are part of a coherent system of metaphorical concepts. So to show that, I've conducted a little pilot study. I had 28 learners of English with a Russian native language background and 28 learners of English with a German background. And I presented to them 15 common English idiomatic expressions. And in the first part of the study, they were asked to just indicate whether they know this idiom or not, so yes or no. In the second part of the study, the participants were shown the same idioms again, and here they were asked to interpret the idiomatic expressions. So they were encouraged to be as detailed as possible, even if they do not know the meaning of the idiom. And later on, I only considered the unfamiliar ones, so only if a person said, no, I don't know the idiom, then I looked at the interpretation and I wanted to find out what are the associative processes that give rise to the interpretation. And my focus was on whether we can see any instances of conceptual metaphors which have possibly shaped the meaning interpretation of an unknown idiomatic expression. So as the results, I'd just like to show you as an example, the German native speakers' interpretations of to blow one stack of the idiom. So as a reminder, it means to become very angry. And the conceptual metaphor is anger is hot fluid in a container. And in the first part of the study, so the German native speakers, 6 of them said that yes, they know the meaning of this idiom. And 22 said no, they do not know it. And then later I just looked at those no's and wanted to see how people interpret it. And then I found out something like this. So 5 people said, this means to be very angry. So please mind that this is just for those people who said they actually do not know the meaning. But what they did, they guessed it correctly. 4 said it means to get mad at somebody, to be aggressive, to destroy, ruin something. So what does this indicate? Of course, one can say that, to blow one stack has some negative connotations. So maybe this has also influenced a person's understanding or like guessing of an idiomatic expression. But still, one can also say that it has also maybe the underlying conceptual metaphor, that people are not aware of, but they have it innate. This is something like conceptual metaphors happen unconsciously. So maybe they have actually thought of this anger is hot fluid in a container notion, and this is how they guessed its meaning correctly. Similar results were found for the native Russian speakers. So here, just one person said that he or she knows the idiom, and 27 said they do not know it. Then I looked again at the 27 meaning interpretation, and I found something similar again, to be angry, shocked, troubled, so on and so forth. So my conclusions from the analysis are the following. So the majority, I looked at all the meaning interpretations, and the majority of the meaning interpretations showed instances of conceptual metaphors underlying the meaning interpretation of the idiomatic expressions. And to me, this suggests that if we teach idiomatic expressions and actually raise the awareness of the conceptual metaphor underlying the idiom, students might find it easier to understand and remember that idiomatic expression. And a big advantage of conceptual metaphors is that they are motivated by general knowledge of the word, which is embodied in the conceptual system of language users. So like this body is a container, as we all humans are kind of structured similarly, you will find that idiom, which is related to anger, to the body being hot in many different cultures and languages. So this might be, if we pay attention to that, learners from different linguistic or cultural backgrounds may actually find it easier to learn this idiomatic expression. So for my future investigations, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd like to study how, or more concretely, how one's native language shapes the comprehension of ALLT idiomatic expressions. Of course, much research has been done in this direction, but I just kind of make this comparisons between languages that are different, like German, Russian is quite different, still maybe there are some universal aspects in that. Same goes for like what role does conceptual metaphor play in the understanding of ALLT idioms, maybe just presenting, idiomatic expressions in different contexts with an explanation of an underlying conceptual metaphor and without one, and then just testing which groups perform better. And the last one, which I'd like to show, is the role of visuals. So as you might have noticed, I've shown some visuals along the way while I was kind of talking about idiomatic expressions, like to blow one's stack, kick the bucket, let the cat out of the bag. That's the way cookies crumble. So what I'd like to find out is, there are lots of visualization of idiomatic expressions, but what I'd like to find out is which type actually helps students to kind of understand and remember that idiom. So not much research has been done in this direction. And what I propose is that there are kind of three ways of depicting and of visualizing an idiomatic expression. So these images were drawn by one of my students, by Clemens Stoixner. And as an example, we had spill the beans. So what should actually the visual depict? Should it be just the literal meaning? So someone has spilled the beans. Should it be maybe a combination of literal and the metaphorical or the idioms? Meaning where we have, here it says like a secret recipe, spilled beans, so it's kind of a combination. Or should it be just the idiom's meaning, so just the metaphorical? So here we do not have anything about like spilling beans, but it just shows what it means, so it's a secret. All right, and I hope that the outcome then will be a handbook, which is structured in terms of idiomatic expressions that have underlying conceptual metaphors, like for anger is hot fluid in a container, it would be blow your stack, flip your lid, hit the ceiling. And then each entry would have an explanation of how these conceptual metaphors work and a visualization of the idiomatic expressions. So based on what I found then in my empirical studies in the future, I will just use this proper type of visual. And I hope that the manual will meet the students' needs and also, kind of finding out some ways of how idiomatic expression can be taught across languages and across cultures. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Carina. Thank you for your interesting presentation. As I see it, the teaching of idioms, English idioms, is somehow ignored.
Yeah.
So what you have said and what you have explained today is really very interesting. It's something for us to take into consideration. I also would like to add that I like your images.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank
you. May I thank you again.